Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. Many of you know me as the host of the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, but by day, I'm the senior partner at Y Street Capital. We have several projects underway that are open to accredited investors residing in the United States. If you'd like to learn more, you can visit ystreetcapital.com/investors. This information is not publicly available, but you can register to join our portal and learn more about the projects we currently have underway. This is not a solicitation for investment. Any investment would be by prospectus only to qualified investors in compliance with U.S. securities regulations. Again, to learn more, visit ystreetcapital.com/investors. The link will be in the show notes. On today's show, we're talking about seeing into the future. Having a successful business relies upon seeing into the future and solving the needs of that future before the rest of the world does. Many of the things that we can see are hidden in plain sight only if you choose to look, but you have to be willing to look. If you look at history, you'll see that wars are very hard to contain. Even the current conflict in the Ukraine is not limited to those two countries. We have an entire European Union involved. The United States is involved. Iran is involved. It looks like even China might become involved. This conflict goes beyond arms sales. We're talking of arms shipments and investments in the defense of a nation. The U.S. has spent more so far arming the Ukrainians than the entire Russian military budget. That might be a misleading number since the cost of arms in the United States might be high compared to other countries, but still, the United States is making a massive investment in the war in the Ukraine. Now, to be sure, the use of commercial technology has also changed warfare. Big-ticket items like fighter jets and bombers don't seem to be playing a significant role in the Ukraine. A year of artillery fire means that companies around the world are ramping up their defense budgets. But is it going to be conventional defense or is it going to be new weapon systems? We're seeing countries throwing fiscal responsibility to the wind and spending whatever it takes to provide national security. We're seeing both Germany and Japan ramping up their defense investments to levels we've not seen in more than 70 years. This means that we're going to experience more printing of money than ever. Some countries are expanding defense spending from 1% of GDP to 2% of GDP, and some even to 3% of GDP. We're seeing more defense startup companies and defense incubators than ever before. You would have traditionally thought of a startup incubator as being focused on technology or blockchain or biotech. We don't typically think of defense incubators, but I'm here to tell you this is a growing industrial complex. If you knew that defense spending was going to be increasing in specific geographic areas, what would you do to help service that need? Now, maybe you're philosophically opposed to the notion of defense spending, so you might choose to do nothing, and that's a perfectly acceptable answer. But at least it's a considered response. Most people by default do nothing because they don't even think that there might be something to do. Now, we don't know if the current war is going to erupt into a hot war on a large scale involving the superpowers. Maybe it'll remain confined to a proxy war. We can only hope the conflict doesn't escalate and that it comes to a speedy end. In war, there are no real winners. But again, wars often last a lot longer than people expect them to. At least that's what history tells us. So even if we put a hot war aside, it's had an impact already on globalization. It's clear that globalization as we knew it has changed and will probably not revert back to the open borders we've experienced over the past 2 decades. At one time, if you were hoping to sell to Walmart, you had to have manufacturing in China in order to be even considered a supplier to Walmart. They wouldn't even talk to you if you didn't have Chinese manufacturing. Today, Walmart won't talk to you unless you have a securities supply story involving sources outside of China. Some companies have shifted manufacturing to Vietnam, to Cambodia, to the Philippines, to other geographies around the world. But the biggest beneficiary of all, I believe, is going to be a shift to Mexico. There are now 28 Chinese companies who have opened large-scale manufacturing plants in Mexico to serve North American customers. Cost of labor in Mexico is higher than the cost of labor in China, but the lower cost and time frame for transportation offsets the higher labor costs, making Mexico every bit as competitive as China. Where Mexico doesn't match China is the depth of its manufacturing ecosystem. You can get virtually any component you need to manufacture your finished product in China. That's not the case in Mexico, at least not yet. This means that global trade routes are about to change. They won't change entirely, but they will shift. Some traffic destined for the Port of Long Beach now might be coming overland through Texas. Texas might become the next transportation gateway to the rest of North America. So if you could see into the future and imagine a few dozen more manufacturing facilities in Mexico, how would that change the demand for transportation and warehousing in Texas? You might be unaware, but the largest brewery in the world is in Mexico, supplying 15 million bottles of beer a day, almost all of it destined to the U.S. market. There's furniture manufacturers producing 3,000 sofas a day, supplying companies like Wayfair, Costco, and major department stores with manufacturing in Mexico. So if you could see into the future and fulfill the needs of those supply chains, what would you do as a real estate investor? As you think about that, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.